Alright, the Federal Reserve and Margin, Chapter 8. In discussing purchasing securities on margin or credit, some background information. Federal Reserve System is appropriate since it regulates the amount of the credit outstanding in the United States. Federal Reserve System is divided in 12 districts throughout the country. It looks like a face of the dollar. It looks like a face at the face of the dollar. On the left side, you see a large letter. The letter indicates the Federal Reserve distributed money. A is from Boston, B is from New York, C is from Philly. The Federal Reserve does not print money. They simply distribute it. Remember that Federal Reserve Bank is not a government agency. It's a bank, but a very special one. It's often called the Banker's Bank. There's no connection to the federal government, and there's some governmental influence discussed below. At the top level, Federal Reserve System Board of Governors. There are 7 governors, each appointed by the President of the United States for a 14-year term. The only restriction appointment member of the Board of Governors is no 2 governors may come from the same Federal Reserve District. In addition, since the terms are 14 years, the governors are politically insulated. The day-to-day pressure for the pressure nominally appoints the governors every 2 years. Consequently, many members of the board are appointed different presidents, political parties, and many varying economic viewpoints represented. The level below the Board of Governors of the Board of Directors, each 12 Federal Reserve Districts owned by the Board of Directors. Each Board of Directors consists of 9 individuals, 3 of whom appointed by the Board of Governors. However, the remaining 6 are elected by members of the bank in each district. As you can see, with 2/3 of each of the board of directors in control of the member of the bank themselves, each district also has a slate of officers. The primary purpose of the Federal Reserve is to regulate the amount of credit outstanding in the United States. Although there are approximately 14,000 commercial banks in the United States today, only 5,000 are members of the Federal Reserve System. How can a mere 1/3 of the banks be so powerful? 5,000 members of the banks are responsible for 75% of the available credit in the United States. How does the Federal Reserve control credit? There are 3 major, several lesser ways. As Federal Reserve requirements, as a member of the Federal Reserve Bank, a bank is required to deposit a percentage of the deposits, which are 3 basic types: the DDA, or demand deposit accounts. Fancy name for the checking accounts. Bank has no idea if the customer is going to write a check or for what amount. For this reason, the monies in the customer checking account will require the highest percentage that will be left in the Federal Reserve. The complex sliding scale formula, but for use, percentage is approximately 10%. Time deposits or CDs, they require a small percentage of deposits because the bank knows when it must return the borrowed funds and can make necessary arrangements. Saving the deposits, the requirement of saving the time deposits because the saving account deposits have a tendency to remain a long period of time. Checking account, in addition, the bank has the right to require a 30-day notice prior to any withdrawal of the right. It's seldom used, but it could be necessary for if the run on the bank. Most people that weren't aware of the condition but just read the first page of your passbook. As a member of the Federal Reserve, the bank that requires to compute the reserve the requirement daily. The banking industry is highly computerized, with the task is easily completed. If at the end of the day the bank has $20 million of the reserve requirement, the record set aside until the wind days, which end of the bank week. At this point, the member of the bank would likely the daily reserve requirement of the previous 2 weeks. Taking an average, it came up to be required $25 million, and there was only $15 million on the deposit with the Federal Reserve. It would have the deposit $10 million by the end of the day to be compliant with the reserve equipment requirement. Under no normal circumstance, it would be very difficult to attract sufficient deposits to satisfy $10 million requirement. However, the other member banks are making same computations, and some will have excess funds. No interest is paid on the Federal Reserve deposits, which one disadvantage is being a member of the Federal Reserve System. So there's no advantage of leaving excess funds in the Federal Reserve that become available to be lent with these banks that require additional deposits. Hence, we get the term federal funds, or more commonly Fed funds. Members of the Federal Reserve have to ask the Federal Reserve wire system, which can move on from funds from one bank to another in a matter of seconds. So while the original and current meaning of Fed funds, who the funds are meet the reserve requirement, Fed funds also have the broader meaning and immediately usual funds opposed to clearing funds. The clearinghouse funds are funds average paid persons use when writing a check to the landlord, store owner, birthday cake check. Some of the funds are not usable by the recipient until the check clears. The check we wrote goes through the clearinghouse system back to the originating bank, which moves the amount of the account into the account of the person who wrote the check. If the banks are in the same Federal Reserve District, the check usually clears the next business day. Checks between districts will take longer depending on the distance between them. Federal fund rates amount. One bank will pay another for the use of funds overnight. The rate is determined supply and demand. If more banks require funds and then have access, the Fed funds rates will increase. The classic example of supply and demand function occurred on December 31st, 1986, which also happened to be on a Wednesday, the end of the bank week. At the particular day, the federal funds rate hit a high of 25%, low of 20.25%. The unusual situation occasioned by the banks wishing to make a cosmetic change of the balance sheet end of the year. However, the end of the year happened on a Wednesday. Because of these accounting moves, moving the banks from themselves, the buyers of the Fed funds, which drove the rate to the unusual high rate. By the end of the day, when the banks had been settled, the requirement of the Federal Reserve there was no demand for the funds, thus dropped 0.25%. With a brief background of the reserve requirement, federal funds let us look at some of the main ways the Federal Reserve regulates credit in the United States. Increased reserve requirement. Federal Reserve that decides to increase the reserve requirements to 10 to 15% of the would-be very severe action. All members would come under the additional requirement that there would be no excess fund that the borrower to attract additional deposits. Higher rates would have to be paid with additional. The deposits must not attract with fast enough. The demand loans would be called the causing liquidation, foreclosure, and so on. There's no doubt that increasing the reserve requirement tightens credit. They're reversing low reverse requirements cause the member of the banks to assess funds, thereby reducing interest rate, easing credit restraints. Tightening too much causes recession. Easing too much causes inflation. The Federal Reserve strives to strike a balance. Discount rate. This rate with the Federal Reserve charges members of the banks banks to borrow money. This discount rate is historically lower than all the other money rates because of the proceeds of the loans or the restricted use. The member of the bank may only borrow at a discount rate. The proceeds are usually exclusive of the meeting of the Federal Reserve requirement. In addition, the loan is secured loan. The Federal Reserve is willing to help the bank out lending money to meet its reserve requirement, but the loan must be collateralized by the very best securities. That is Treasury bonds, note bonds, and those securities issued by the certain government agencies that are guaranteed as a principal or interest. Decreasing discount rate has only very minor effective amount of credit available. Federal Open Market Committee. The action and decisions of the committee have most immediate effect on the credit availability. Severity of the effect falls somewhere between an increasing reserve requirement and changing the discount rate. The Federal Open Market Committee comprises 7 governors of the Federal Reserve Board and 5 of 12 presidents of various districts throughout the country, which are also President of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Other presidents of the rotate on and off the committee periodically. The committee meets once a month, more often if needed, decides day-to-day credit policies that will be followed. Should the committee decide to tighten credit, this would be accomplished by several various government obligations. Member of the bank charging the bank's respective reserve requirement accounts. This would cause the banks to be low reserve requirements, and the monies must be found to replenish their account. Attracting additional deposits require higher interest rate, which in turn means credit will cause the borrower more. And the Federal Open Market Committee that decides to lose their credit policy or in order, the Federal Reserve will start buying various government bills, notes, and bonds, and will pay the banks by crediting their reserve accounts. Then there would be an excessive reserve of the vast majority of the member banks, with no interest being paid on the funds left with the Federal Reserve. The member banks withdraw excess to put into the hands of the public in the form of loans to the entire consumer to borrow, that whereas surplus funds of the bank must at a lower rate of competition must follow the Federal Open Market Committee buys it easy with the credit, lowers its interest rate. The Federal Reserve prefers this method to ease and tighten credit because it's readily reversible. Other ways Federal Reserve affects credit are related to the security industry. Regulation T regulates the amount of money the broker may lend on securities. Regulation U regulates the amount of money bank may lend on securities. Regulation G regulates the amount of money that organizations other than banks and brokers may lend on securities. Margin accounts and short sales. Extension of the credit customers of the security transaction regulated in 3 entities: Federal Reserve Board, New York Stock Exchange, New York National Association of Security Dealers, and individual firms. The Federal Reserve, under Regulation T, limits the amount the broker may lend to the customer wishing to purchase securities, dictate the amount the customer may deposit when selling securities short. Regulation T's initial requirement is only employed when a client makes purchase on sale in his account. New York Stock Exchange establishes maintenance requirements of set level of the account will deteriorate before some of the action must be taken by the customer. The rules designated to protect the broker. Should the customer fail to take action, the broker is empowered to liquidate the account. The authority granted to the customer agreement which is signed with the customer before the account is open. Virtually all broker and dealers establish house rules, generally more stringent with the maintenance requirement of the New York Stock Exchange, often more strict with the federal requirements. For example, the Regulation T permits the listed security to be bought on the margin, but most firms will not permit credit to be allowed on low-price stocks, perhaps under $10 per share. You of course will have to know your own firm's house rules thoroughly. They could not subject subjective exam, as they may differ from firm to firm. Lewis concentrates on Federal Reserve maintenance requirements. Federal Reserve requirements. Federal Reserve Regulation T sets the amount of the clear that a client must deposit the purchase or sale of short activities, short securities, similar limited, are placed on the banks of Regulation U and other lenders, factors, financing companies, etc. by Regulation G. In the cash account, the client is deposited 100% of the cash cost of each purchase. No credit can be allowed with accounts of the permanent extension of the credit are called margin accounts. Equity securities are as well listed. Corporate bonds and convertible bonds, municipal direct obligation, U.S. government are bought and sold in margin account. Regulation T not only sets the amount the customer must deposit, it mandates when the required payment is to be made in both cash and margin account. Payments must be promptly, but no later than 2 business days after the settlement date, with the currently 3 business days after the trade date offering, referred to as T plus 3. The additional standards required of the broker and dealer to pay the seller broker. 3rd business day of the client confirmed will show that the settlement date of trade. However, the client does not violate the regulate 2 if she pays the 5th business during the 5th business day following the trade. Should the client unable to pay for the valid reason, such illness, mail delivery problems, dealer can request extension line of time of the payment. Extension can be granted by any registered stock exchange or any of the district with the National Association of Securities Dealers. A client may receive the 5 extension with a 12-month period, regardless of the reason. Often customers refuse to pay the transaction. In this case, of the broker liquidation, the transaction firm experiences loss. They may sue the client, but there's not a concern with the Federal Reserve. Customers sometimes make a payment in proper manner. For example, the Monday the client buys the 1,000 shares of Ford Motor Company. On Wednesday, instructs themselves with the 1,000 Eastman Kodak to provide payment for the purchase of Ford and proper payment. In order to pay for the purchase of securities by selling other securities, then transactions should take place on the same day. For example, the client owned both Ford and Eastman Kodak shares for 2 days while having sufficient funds to hold only one of these positions. Another instance, should the customer purchase a security in cash account and sell the same security prior to the banking full cash payment, the account will become frozen for 90 calendar days. 90 free days freeze requires the customer to have funds in advance by many purchases next to their 90 days. In requiring payment for the customer, Regulation T does allow a small amount of leeway. Broker permitted to overlook an amount due to the account up to $1,000. The amount is not forgotten. The client shows the broker, but no regulation VT violates occurs. This amount is not deposited again, and the waiver is purely district with the broker. Long marginal account. Long simply means the investor has purchased the security otherwise acquired with the security. The margin is amount with the client must deposit the purchase of the security with the margin set at 50% of the client purchasing security must be 50% of the cost. Broker may lend customer difference between cost of purchase and the cost margin requirements. The amount of the loan value, loan margin accounts will contain the long position of the current margin requirements, 50% of the current loan and also 50%. Suppose customer opens a new margin account, purchases 60,000 marginal stocks, deposits 30,000, 50%, and the broker would lend him the remaining 30,000. If the value of the account was 60,000, the customer owes the broker 30,000, which the equity of the account is 30,000. The amount that must be, and the amount is he deposited. Same buying a house with $60,000. If you put 30,000, take 30,000 mortgage from the bank. The house is worth 60,000, but your equity is 30,000, and that you put up. The bank loan is secured by the property, and you should default the payment of the house. Maybe sold with the prepay of the debt. With the example, the security of your account and collateral for your loan for the broker, and his problem arise, firm can sell the security to protect them from the loss. Security of the margin accounts, collateral they kept by the broker, the street name, the name of the broker that enables you the sale of the baby rapidly should later condition require. Clients owes broker $30,000. Broker generally requires the money which they lay into the clients by making a call loan at the bank. Call loan is a loan made by a broker using securities as collateral of the broker. Supplies will come to the account with the customer who's ended the borrow. The term of the hypotheticated, which is a synonym for pledge, send them in for pledge. The customer hypothecates pledges the security to the broker, who then repledges them at the bank to secure a call loan. The broker cannot use all securities of the customer account. This would usually be necessary to make the required loan. The current limit permits the broker to repledge the securities in the account with a value of 140% of the client's debit balance. If another client debit is $30,000, the broker could pledge $42,000 and 140% of the $30,000 security for the bank, security for the loan over the credit. The remaining security in the account is $18,000, $60,000 MV minus $42,000 pledged. Must be segregated clearly to identify the customer property. The bank requires less than. If the bank requires less than 140% collateral, we pledge only the amount. The maximum amount that is pledged may be used as 140%. Once the account has been established, we accept the value of the charge. The market moves up or down. Let's look at it account again. Suppose securities appreciated $10,000. Increased value show the market value in the equity of the debit would not change. As with $60,000 a house that you bought, it would increase the value of the $10,000. You would not owe the bank any more money, but would add your equity in the house. After increase, our client would appear as $40,000 equity, direct DR $30,000, market value $70,000. As you can see, the broker merely finances the transaction. The broker does not take profits or loses. At this point, the account excess equity with regulation of the T, 50% of the account with $70,000 market value, real equity at $35,000, 50% of the account with $40,000 equity, which $55,000 except for the requirement of excess equity could be withdrawn by the client with the cash except for the percent of the client increased his debt by $5,000, reducing his equity by the same amount. After withdrawing his equity, the account would show his easy method of the excess equity is subtract 50% from the current market value of the equity from the equals equity requirement excess over regulation T. We are in compliance with regulation T. Our core equity is 35% and 50% of the market value of the debt loan. $35,000, also 50% of the market value. On the other hand, the customer develops excess equity with the account with the might wish to use the excess purchase additional securities. A new purchase requires a full and partial payment. We're using 50% excess equity translated with a greater amount of what is called buying power. The determinant buying power, we divide excess equity by the current marginal requirement. In our example, there we have $5,000 excess. We divide 50% current market general requirement. Result with $10,000 buying power, and in this account, the client that has used buying power and purchased $10,000 worth of market value to debit it would be increased to $10,000, and the account would now show current market value $80,000, direct loan DR $40,000, equity $40,000. Note that the equity is not increased for the client did not deposit any funds additional with the purchase. If they added a $10,000 wing to the $70,000 house borrowed with the money with the bank, the equity of the house would not increase. The value would increase. The loan would increase. Your equity would be the same. You would just have the bigger house. Our client has a bigger account. Our value increased the long marginal account. Excess equity is created with the amount of the withdrawal and the cash that can be used to create buying power, which increases the accounts of the value of the equity when regulation T 50% of the buying power is excess equity multiplied by 2. To demonstrate the rest of the value of the account increase that does not look up at the result of the decrease of the market value, some of the original $60,000 security decline to $56,000. The result with a $4,000 decline with both market and equity. The debit stays the same. Home bought declined value with not exchange with the amount of the mortgage. LS the account now shows $56.30 and equity $26. This account is not a trouble as the bank with a $56,000 collateral for a $30,000 loan. However, the equity of $26,000 below the requirement of regulation T. Account with $56,000 market value equity should be $28,000 or 50% that we're looking at another way into the account. $56,000 market value loan value $28,000. 50% of the client borrowing for $30,000. Regulation T never requires additional deposit. The account declines over the requirement to discuss later on our maintenance requirements. However, the when an account falls below Regulation 2 requirement below becomes a restricted account and certain limitations are placed for the future trading with the client. Remember, restricted does not necessarily mean that the account is in dire trouble. In an example, certainly is not. It just means that it is below the requirement of Regulation T. The restricted account client may continue with the trade, but must do so with a controlled manner. The customer wishes to make a purchase with the restricted account that he must deposit 50% of the cost of that purchase. Our client wishes to purchase $2,000 with additional stock. He must deposit $1,000 or 50% of the amount now the account appears. Market value increased to $2,000 on the debit. Only $1,000 client deposited $1,000 into the account. The deposit also increased the equity. Note, but the client did not have to bring in the entire account up to 50% equity, but was only required to deposit 50% of the cost of the new purchase. Overall account will improve prior to the purchase of debit at 53.6%. Market value $30,000. DR divided by 56,000. Market value of the purchase of the debit represents only 53.4% of the market value. 31,000 direct debit divided by 58,000 market value. Suppose the example. Client wished to deposit securities in lieu of cash, as the amount of the cash required was $1,000. The must is deposit security with the loan value of the amount. We simply divide the amount of cash needed. $1,000 current loan value, 50 of the securities. Find $2,000 security value would require again the margin. 50% would take for the cash needed. The 1,000 multiplied by 2 of the margin. Add another level would need a cumbersome formula that we have used after the deposit of the 2,000 securities in account would show the market value 4,000 securities purchased plus securities deposit. Debit and equity would also be increased by 2,000. Here's the account market value 60,000, 32,000 debit and 28,000 equity. Again, the account has improved. The debit has reduced 53.6 to 53.3%. Should the customer restricted account, all securities may withdraw 50% of the proceeds. The sale with account is shown as 16% market value, 32 debit, 28 equity. Customer sells securities value of 3,000 withdrawals 1,500 over the amount of cash should be account appear as 57 the market value, 30.5 debit and 26.5 equity. The sale will reduce the market value. The amount reduces quality. Equity of the debt won $1,500 by 50%. Proceed with the withdrawal in cash. Client did not wish to withdraw $1,500 rather than left in the account. Market value to debit the balance would be reduced to an entire $3,000 as follows. 57.29.28. The account should be restricted with the Regulation T. The account of 57 and the market value requires 28.5. Our client has only $28,000 equity. Or the special memorandum account to protect money for the becoming available. The customer margin accounts were permitted to spend special memorandum accounts. And these clients sell securities market value with increasing result access to the note available to the client's special memorandum account. The amount is now available to clients later with the purchase of additional security with the cash withdrawal. The special memorandum accounts do not contain money, but simply records funds that may be used by the client. Must make an available line of credit in case, for example, when the client paid $3,000 saleable, let's assume they did not withdraw the cash and the account would appear. Note, with both the market value of the debit, it has reduced $3,000 and the $1,500 covers the special memorandum account. The memorandum entry for the client had amount available with the May withdrawal and the cash toward a payment for the future purchase. Some 2 weeks later, if the client requests $1,500 over the account, would then show. Would see sent with a check with $1,500 and give the debit and increase the equity of the amount. Suppose that instead of the withdrawing $1,500, the customer called 2 weeks later with the wish to purchase $5,000 additional security. $1,500 special memorandum account could be used to partial payment of the purchase. Ordinarily would have the deposit $2,500, 50% of the $5,000, but with $1,500 in a special memorandum account, only $1,000 additional funds would be required after the trade would show. $5,000 purchase increase the market value of the amount. $1,000 deposit added to the equity. $400,000 additional cost purchase added to his debit of the special memorandum account can be used for the purchase cost. Cash withdrawals with one limitation can be used if such would bring the account below the minimum maintenance requirement prescribed by the New York Stock Exchange and the New York National Social Security dealers. These requirements are detailed later with the section employed with the account reached for the dangerous level when permitted with a special memorandum account to bring the account below the level of example of prohibition shown in later discussion. Hard short account regulation T requirement selling security short with currently selling long same as for long position customers must deposit 50% to receive the short sale of the account. The share of the client, the broker sell with 1,000 shares of the ABC short of $120 per share. She must deposit $60,000 in her account. She deposit is required under regulation T. The credit control instrument the client selling short created 100,000 shares of ABC. Her deposit would reduce the effect of the additional value of the economy. Additionally, her deposit protects brokers loss of ABC rise from the value of the client sell short. She does not borrow any money. She borrows stock. Therefore, there's never the debit balance in the short account. They always credit balance. Initially, there was proceed with the sale when they add marginal deposit determine the credit in the account. For example, sale 100 ABCs at 120, 50% marginal deposit credit balance at 180. We determined the equity account subtract the current value of the market stock is 1,800 over 120 is $60 equity. The credit balance does not change. The equity of the account will change with the market value of the ABC rise or falls back. Looking forth over the short margin accounts, we discuss the merchant short selling. For entering the order to sell short, the broker must assume the ability to borrow the stock of the transition. Maybe the stock must be delivered to the buyer. A short, but the seller does not have the stock. It must be borrowed. If the owner were handling a short sale, the first attempt would be made to borrow the shares of another client, or the broker would own them and had signed a consent to loan securities. Feeling that our broker would approach the other firms as to lend the stock, perhaps broker A would agree to lend 1,000 shares of ABC to our broker. Broker A would take the stock from the client who had agreed to allow shares to be used for this purpose, assuring the borrowing of stock that our broker would now enter the order to sell 1,000 ABCs at market short. New York Stock Exchange floor, our broker might sell the stock to broker B at $120 per share. Broker A would lend the stock to the broker delivery broker B to the buyer. Broker B would pay our broker $120,000 for ABC, with our broker would give broker A a security for the loan on the stock. When the trade is settled, the party's position, broker B would be bought 1,000 ABC at 120, received shares from our broker and paid us $120,000. Broker A loaned 1,000 shares of ABC to our broker and received $120,000 as collateral for loan. Our broker has only opened a contract with the money of $120,000 is at brokers A and stock at 1,000 brokers at brokers B. A broker does have a $60,000 50% required to pay the short sale under regulation T. The instead of the broker lends to the stock for our broker the money received the collateral. Broker A leaves from the operation business lending the current interest rates to the clients who have a debt balance. Our broker can use the $60,000 margin deposit in the same manner. If the opportunity to look over the annual reports for the larger retail brokers, you'll find the use of the money float is often the largest source of revenue. Stock sometimes at a premium should be stock difficult to borrow due to merge taking over some other unusual event. And borrower may have to pay a fee with the lender to use the stock. The fee over the course is paid with the client who sold the stock short. In period of high interest stock may be lended with the means that the lenders pay with the borrowed interest of the money. Remember, broker A is $120,000 cent is being lent at the perhaps 10% of the broker A pays our broker interest on the money of the lower rate. The seal realizes the fine print profit of the transaction. If neither premium nor rate is involved, the securities are to be lending flat. As stated, the client who sold 100,000 AB shares short would have effectively created those shares. The two owners, same with the 1,000 shares. Broker A client who shared the loan. Broker B who bought them, and ABC cash divided dividend or stock dividend splits in stock. It will make payment to broker B with who is in possession of the stock, who takes care of broker A's client. The shorter seller of the course order, the client must pay the lender distribution made by ABC, but the only privilege of the lender of the stock loses the voting rights for the share. ABC will allow with the 1,000 share the vote. Broker B will receive these voting rights, and broker A clients will surrender the privilege. Getting back to the original example, equity is increased. The ABC declines in price and decreases. ABC rises in price. Short selling in the high-risk market technique with no limited potential. Lawfully you bought ABC at $120 per share, but then only go to 120 points. Unlikely most possible that you're short $120 It can go up to 200, 300, 300, 400, or more. In addition, you will be liable for any cash dividends distribution that are paid during the period of your short. Short selling has a place in the markets. It should, however, be a place reserved for sophisticated investors who fully understand the unlimited risk involved. Maintenance requirement of the New York Stock Exchange National Social Security dealers impose the regulation Martin's account on the maintenance requirements, which will divide in 4 categories. U.S. government municipal securities. U.S. government municipal securities exempt from Regulation T of the Federal Reserve of the National Stock Exchange. New York Stock Exchange, however, does require the minimal maintenance as follows. U.S. government, there's only a sliding scale, requires less for the instrument approach to mature. The following table to give the requirement of Treasury bill interest-bearing notes and bonds. Municipal securities, they are classified exempt security with the maintenance of the requirement imposed by the Federal Reserve and Regulation T. However, the New York Stock Exchange initial maintenance requirements, which are 15% of the market value or 7% of the principal, whichever is much greater. Customer purchase 10M in New York and New York City, 8.5 of 25 at 87. Requirement established 15% of the market value, $1,305, or 7% of the principal of $700, which is greater in this case, $1,305. Requirement municipal, usually 15% of the marketplace. This base because the order 7% requirement of the larger of the two, the market value of the bond would have be 46,625 or lower. Other governments additional above the initial maintenance requirements require zero coupon obligations are maintenance of long positions, minimum maintenance of the long position 25% market unit of regulation. 2, initial equity of 50% of the new reach and maintenance level of the account must decline substantially. New York Stock Exchange wants to protect the broker from loss and therefore requires minimum equity from long position. A client of long position value that 60,000 must maintain a minimum equity of 15,000 or 1/4%. Note that the equity of 15% reaches 25 market value, also 1/3 over the debit at 45, which can thereby express minimum requirement 25% market value, 1/3 over the debit balance. Second method should be used on the project, being the point in which the client accounts could decline before requiring action of the maintenance requirements. To the question, test yourself at the point discussed earlier in this section. Alright, maintenance for short position, many depending on long position, potential loss of short position can accurately measure. Long position requires a minimum maintenance of 25%, and short account minimum equity must be generally 30% of the market value. Clients over the short 1,000 shares XYZ trading at $140,000 minimum equity of 42,000, 30% of 140. In this account, the minimum maintenance rule short position, even the more stringent low price stock. Obvious reason low price stock can go down very far, but unlimited downside potential the minimum maintenance short position. Stock under $5 per share, $2.50 per net $100, $2.50 per share, 100% of the current market value, whichever is greater. For example, client shorts 1,000 shares of the stock at $2 per share with a minimum equity of $2,500. Client shorts 1,000 shares stock at $4 per share, minimum equity of $4,000. Stock trading at $5 per share, higher, 5 at 30% market value, whichever is greater. For example, the client shorts 1,000 stock currently trading at $10 per share, must have a minimum equity of $5,000. Client short 1,000 shares stock currently trading $80 per share with a minimum equity $24,000. Note the stock trading at 1687 or higher minimum equity, the short position maintenance requirement of 30% market value. The stock trading below 1686 per share, more stringent $5 per share equity requirements would apply. $2,000 minimum equity. Discourage small investors from going into debt through margin trade. The maintenance rules state with the minimum equity account with $2,000 must be $2,000 or 100% of the market value, whichever is less. Note on short sales, minimum always $2,000. We did not know what the price of the customer repurchase stock to cover the short. Looks like in another case with $2 million would apply, $2,000 would apply. The equity has been reduced. Minimum allowed maintenance requirement of $2,000. Demonstrate that special money account cannot be used to bring account. Marginal account cannot be used to bring account below the minimum maintenance requirements. Often client with both long and short positions account. Long shorts must be compared separately, but the requirements differ. However, it is considered that one account to determine the compliance with the marginal requirements. Our discussion of the margin has focused federal maintenance requirements in your firm own house rules. You must important feature be sure that thoroughly familiar with those requirements. Chapter 9, Options.